That must have been so frustrating for you to know what you were doing, who you were fighting for, the truth you were trying to put out, and yet everyone in the world is, slandering you. I mean, it didn't look like a lot of fun, and I watched a lot of those interviews from back then. It didn't look like a lot of fun to be in there.
No, it was a sharp learning curve. It really was. I remember sitting down in front of Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes, and the producer on that show had talked to me about their experience with the Insider, the tobacco insider, and how they changed their story or cut it. And that was a disgrace to 60 Minutes, and they would never go that way again. And I sat down with Ed Bradley, and he said, this is just going to be a friendly chat. And then, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cameras rolling. He said, so children around the world are dying from measles and you're to blame. Is that right? And it was a kind of hot button way into it. And I think, thanks, Ed. Nice one, not sort of. Anyway, but it was a sharp learning curve. And again, it was assisted enormously by the realization that this wasn't about me. And it wasn't an anti-vaccine story. It was about safety. It was about wanting to make things safer for children, how to deal with this enormous problem that we were seeing clinically and put it into some context that honored the mother's story, the parent's story. And that's what it was about. It was a simple story made infinitely complex in order to dismantle it, to discredit it. And ultimately, it will be proven to be true.
And for people that don't know, what was that story? What were you seeing and what were you asserting that could be true back then?
What happened is the parents started calling me and saying, my child was developing perfectly normally. They had an MMR vaccine and then they had a reaction. They went to sleep for 3 days. They woke up, they were never the same. They had a seizure, they were never the same. They had a very high fever, they were never the same. And they lost their speech, language interaction, their socialization, and ultimately they were diagnosed with autism. And I said, I'm a gastroenterologist. I know nothing about autism. It was so rare when I was at medical school that we weren't even taught about it. And they said, well, there's an epidemic of this problem. But the reason I'm coming to see you, doctor, is that my child has terrible gastrointestinal problems. He's failing to thrive. He's bloated. I know he's in pain. He's lost the ability to express himself, but I know he's in pain. His self-injury is a measure of his pain. I, as his mother, believe there is a link between what's happening in his intestine and his neurological condition. Because when we treat this, when we put him on a diet, this gets better. And so I listened to that story because that was my duty. And when I researched it and we then investigated these children, lo and behold, these children had an inflammatory bowel disease. It was subtle, but it was nonetheless definite. And when we treated that inflammation, not only did the gastrointestinal symptoms got better, but the autism got better. And we had been taught by psychiatrists at that time that this was a dead-end disease. There was no treating it, no curing it, no making it better. Put the child in a home and forget about them, move on. That was a disgrace, and it was completely wrong. So in all these aspects, the mothers had been right, the parents had been right. And we had confirmed that. The medical profession, virtually to a man and a woman, had been wrong. And so when the mothers and the father said, this happened after a vaccine, I'm not anti-vaccine, I took my child to be vaccinated on time, but this is what happened. Then we had an absolute moral and professional obligation to investigate that to the best of our ability. And the thing that really convinced me is that when I went to talk to the Centers for Disease Control scientists in 2000, I shared with them the idea that, look, it's not every child. Everybody gets MMR. Only some children develop this problem. What is it about those children who develop the problem? What's different? Is it the age at which they get the vaccine? Is it, if they get it younger, are they at greater risk? Because we know children with natural measles, if they get it under 1, they're at greater risk of a severe disease than if they get it after 1. And so they went away and they tested that hypothesis, and that is exactly what they found. Exactly what they found. But it's not what they published. They published something completely different. And 14 years later, Dr. William Thompson came forward from the CDC. He said, I was in charge of this study. I ran the study. I designed it. I collected the data, and we lied. we committed scientific fraud. We found an effect. We found that the younger you got the vaccine, the greater the risk. And we buried those data. We changed the findings. We destroyed the documents. But I knew that there were questions being asked by the Department of Justice. There were FOIA requests for these papers. I knew it was a criminal offense, so I kept everything, and here it is. And so we had not only his word, but we had all of the raw data from that time showing exactly what they'd found. And that was Vaxxed. That was the film Vaxxed. The first time ever that a CDC insider from the Vaccine Safety Office had come forward and said, we have done a terrible thing. I can no longer live with it. I am ashamed. And here is all the information. And people say to me, you know, some people have said afterwards, well, you made that up. That was just a fake story and it's all been discredited. Let me tell you this, that we accused those 5 scientists from the CDC of one of the worst humanitarian crimes ever. Why? Because it was their sworn duty to protect the health and well-being of these children, and they did it completely the opposite. If there had been a word of a lie, any mistakes in that movie, they would have sued us to the moon and back again. And there's not been a whisper, not a single whisper. Why? Because they know that it's true.